Chapter 124, The Green Tower Master, 1. Inside of a spacious aerial carriage, Mare sat next to Eugene and distractedly fiddled with her fingers. No matter how much she thought about it, this whole situation didn't make any sense to Mare. Aisha belonged to Sienna. The same went for witchcraft and everything else that was in Sienna's hall. It all belonged to Sienna. Although they were currently displayed in the Royal Library Akron, the royal family of Aroth could not claim ownership of them. It was unacceptable for them to do so. Aroth had already asked far too much of Sienna. The Magic Kingdom of Aroth had a long history. The founder of Aroth, the Magic King, was called the first archwizard in the history of humankind, someone who had reached the pinnacle of ancient magic. Ever since then, Aroth had produced several great wizards. However, no other wizard had had as large an effect on the whole field of magic as Sienna. None were able to copy her feat of defeating a demon king with just a human's body. Aroth was only able to establish its title as the Magic Kingdom because Sienna, having returned from Helmuth, had settled in Aroth. In the following 300 years, countless wizards and people dreaming of becoming wizards had been drawn to Aroth out of admiration for Sienna and had settled here. Even after Sienna had gone into seclusion, this trend had continued unabated until the present day. We already convinced the royal family, Mare thought as her lips stuck out in a pout. Of course, that persuasion was based on the threat of drowning the entirety of Abram. In any case, the important thing was that they had been convinced. Mare assessed the situation. Crown Prince Honian seemed to have the intention of handing Akasha over to Eugene from the very beginning. If that old man called the Prime Minister hadn't tried to hold on to it and failed, the handover would have gone much more smoothly. That was how things should have ended. Sir Eugene, Mare spoke up after some hesitation. There's no need for you to accommodate the Green Tower Master's stubbornness. The Green Tower Master, Generic Osman, was a wizard who thought of himself as the chosen one. That had also been the case with Generic's father, the former Green Tower Master. Mare clearly remembered just how wicked and terrible of a wizard that man was. While claiming that it was for the sake of magic and Lady Sienna, he had gotten consent from the royal family to dissect Mare, whom he treated as a mere familiar, no, as a mere thing. Although Aroth had acknowledged Akasha's handover, Generic refused to recognize it. From the moment he was born, he had been installed with a pride in his bloodline that made him unable to acknowledge what he should already have been forced to admit. Generic still felt that he could personally claim to be the legitimate successor of the wise Sienna, so he had come to Eugene and issued a challenge. He never once doubted the fact that Akasha, which he himself couldn't even use, would one day be the magic staff that belonged solely to him. No matter how irritated and angry the Green Tower Master gets, he still has no right to claim Akasha's ownership, Mare argued. He also has no way of taking it from you by force. That's probably true, Eugene agreed. In the first place, asking for a duel was ridiculous and absurd. Even if Sir Eugene were to refuse the challenge, no one would call you a coward for doing so. Instead, they would consider it pitiful that the Green Tower Master would actually attempt to force a junior many years younger than himself into a duel, Mare said indignantly. Eugene responded wordlessly. Even if the Green Tower Master absolutely refuses to back down, there's still no need to take part in a duel. After all, the Red Tower Master, no, practically all the Tower Masters except for the Green Tower Master will support Eugene in this. How amusing that the other Tower Masters respect Lady Sienna more than the Green Tower Master, who claims to be Lady Sienna's legitimate successor, Mare commented. Instead of replying, Eugene just grinned at her. As Mare, who was sitting across from Eugene, looked at him with eyes full of anxiety, he just shrugged casually. Mare recalled the exact moment during the conversation that Eugene's attitude had undergone a transformation. When Generic had first appeared out of nowhere, Eugene hadn't taken the lead in the conversation. It had been Melkith El-Haya and Mare who had taken turns wrestling with Generic. A mere familiar dares to. Unable to control his rage, Generic had spat out these words. At that moment, Eugene's expression had changed. When it was revealed that Generic's father was behind Mare's dissection in an attempt to uncover witchcraft's core mysteries, Eugene had gotten up from his seat. Is it really because of me? Mare couldn't help but ask this question after a few moments of hesitation. There was no need for Eugene to go that far. Mare hadn't revealed that information because she had wanted to spur Eugene into action. A mere familiar? Hearing words like these didn't have any effect on her. Although Eugene had told Mare that she wasn't just a familiar, Mare had already heard such hurtful words from people like Generic so many times that she had gotten tired of them. As such, Mare didn't care even if she had to hear such nonsense one more time. As long as Sienna had truly thought of Mare as a daughter, and Eugene kept reassuring her that she wasn't just a familiar, but a human being, that alone was enough for Mare. It's just that, Eugene finally spoke up with a smirk, that bastard the Green Tower Master looked down on me. Eugene had always had this sort of personality, ever since he was Hamel. Even if he started out trying to control himself, the moment that his opponent crossed a line that Hamel had set in his own mind, then he definitely wouldn't be able to hold it in. He would need to vent his anger and irritable temper on the offender somehow. It was just like back then 7 years ago, when he had first arrived at the Lionheart clan's main estate for the bloodline continuation ceremony. At that time, Eugene hadn't really wanted to get into an unnecessary fight with the twins from the direct line. However, when Sion began disparaging Gerhard, Eugene's own father, Eugene couldn't hold it in any longer and he had accepted Sion's challenge to a duel. Puhaha. Melkith, who had been silently listening to them talk, suddenly burst into laughter. She wrapped her arms around her stomach as she doubled over cackling, then nodded her head and said, "You're right. Just like you said, the Green Tower Master, that bastard really is looking down on you. I've always thought he was a nasty old man. Why do you think he came looking for you today of all days?" "Because Master Lovelian is absent," Eugene answered. "That's right. If the Red Tower Master was still in his Tower of Magic, would the Green Tower Master have dared to come looking for you spouting this nonsense about a duel? That bastard, he probably felt really conflicted when he saw you with me," Melkith smugly guessed. "Even so, he still approached us in the end and spat out his nonsense. Is that because he feels that the White Tower Master is actually inferior to himself?" Mare speculated. "Haha." Melkith laughed harshly. "If that really is the case, then that bastard Generic really is a fool. I would even bet that among the current-day Tower Masters, not a single one of them is a worse wizard than Generic. It's not just the Tower Masters either. Tremple Vizard, that aristocrat, would probably be able to take care of Generic in just 10 minutes. Eugene felt a bit surprised by these words. The impression that Eugene had gotten from Tremple was that he wasn't all that impressive of a wizard. He seemed to just be an old wizard who threw around stale jokes that weren't all that funny and who had always annoyed Eugene from the moment they had met by following him around and calling out, "Lord Eugene, Lord Eugene." Brat, I can probably tell what you're thinking from that expression on your face. That old man, Tremple, despite what he looks like, is actually quite the impressive person. In the first place, the fact that he's able to stand at the heat of the court wizards as their commander means that he has to be Aratha's #1 battle wizard," Melkith revealed. Eugene marveled. "His looks really are deceptive." Melkith speculated, "That's probably because he's satisfied. He's already reached the age that he has, there's no position higher than the one he currently occupies, and it's not like there is a wartime situation going on. In any case, Generic must have still pressed on after seeing me with you because he probably wasn't sure of my relationship with you. Had he kept trying to pressure me into agreeing even after I had refused, would you have taken my side?" Eugene asked. "There's no need to even ask such an obvious question. However, didn't you still end up foolishly accepting his request? That's why I've accompanied you here," Melkith said with a bright smile. "Magic comes in innumerable forms. After mastering their speciality of magic, each wizard who has gone on to successfully become an archwizard has had to develop their own unique, signature spell. You should already be familiar with one, right? The Red Tower Master's Pantheon. "I know of it, though I haven't learned it," Eugene admitted. "If you want to inherit that spell from him, you will probably have to actually reach the 8th circle first. That's not just the case with the Red Tower Master's Pantheon either. All Archwizard's signature spells are high-level spells that can't be imitated if you're not in the 8th circle." Melkith abruptly changed her mind. "No, they might be inimitable even if you do reach the 8th circle. The specialty of the Red Tower of Magic was summoning magic. As its Tower Master, Lovelian was the best summoner among the current generation of wizards. His signature spell, Pantheon, was able to call on a whole pantheon of summons, each of whom had the power equivalent to a natural disaster." Melkith informed Eugene, Generic's signature spell is Yggdrasil. A spell that turns his own body into a giant tree. Or at least that's the most convenient way to think of it. No, would it be better to consider it a flower? But it doesn't really suit him, does it? No, it doesn't, Eugene agreed. Still, you can't take that spell lightly. The moment that Yggdrasil is set up, Generic becomes a very difficult opponent to deal with. His attack speed is fast and he has crowd control, but that's only the most obvious threats. What makes him especially tricky is that the entire land that Generic roots himself in comes under his control, Melkith elaborated with a grin as she pointed out the window. In principle, Generic might be able to take over about half of Pentagon. Isn't that absurd? But an 8th Circle Archwizard is just that sort of existence. And that's the Archwizard Generic Osman that you're scheduled to duel with. However, in his duel with me, he won't be able to use that awesome signature spell of his, right? Eugene pointed out. That's true. Because Yggdrasil is Generic's original 8th Circle spell. However, it's not like he's only limited to using only low-rank spells either, right? Melkith intentionally erased her smile and stared at Eugene as she warned him. Generic developed Yggdrasil by combining several different original spells. The completed version of Yggdrasil is in the 8th Circle, but the previous version of the spell, the Divine Tree, is in the 6th Circle. Generic was probably intending to use that spell to win from the very beginning. How cheap, so that's why he set the limit at the 6th Circle? Probably. While pretending to make such a reasonable concession, he actually just wants to reinforce his reputation as a wizard by crushing you. Changing the subject, Eugene asked, "What kind of spell is the Divine Tree?" "It's a miniature version of Yggdrasil," Melkith answered. "Although he can't just fire high-level magic like he could as Yggdrasil, it will still allow Generic to control the ground at the site of the duel." "Well, that just means I need to keep flying," Eugene said with a shrug. "That's a joke, right?" Melkith asked in disbelief. "You intend on flying in the sky while facing a wizard of a higher circle than you? The moment you start flying, you'll be sent crashing to the ground with a dispel." "We can't be sure of that until I try," Eugene said confidently. "If you're not going to encourage me, could you at least stop trying to scare me off?" "I'm just trying to tell you that you can still give up at this point," Melkite informed him as she leaned over and looked closely at Eugene. "Brat, I like your hot-bloodedness. Since that bastard, the Green Tower Master, tried to take you for a fool, there's nothing wrong with getting angry at him. However, what do you think that there is to gain from taking part in a real duel against him? The honor of fearlessly accepting a challenge from a wizard who's stronger than you are? But is that honor worth as much as Akasha?" Mare didn't say anything and just kept her head bowed. No matter how much she thought about it, it felt like it was her fault that this duel had been finalized. Even if you call off the duel at this point, there shouldn't be many people who will look down on you for it. Because you're still young after all. And if Generic puts up a fuss because of that, I'll take care of him. What? Do you feel like you're burdening me? That bastard, Generic, probably won't want to fight me for real in any case, and I feel the same way, Melkith assured him with a grin as she pointed behind herself, where Generic was riding in the aerial carriage ahead of them. "As long as I stand up to that bastard and quarrel with him, the Red Tower Master should find his attention drawn to here and come running over from Abram. The other Tower Masters should also follow suit. If that's how the situation plays out, Generic also won't be able to continue being so stubborn." "I didn't accept the duel because the blood suddenly rushed to my head," Eugene interrupted her. "Since he refuses to recognize me, I want the chance to prove my qualifications to him. I also want him to apologize to Mare." Mare hesitantly began, "Sir Eugene, I'm Finn. But I'm not fine, so just drop it. Mare, you know who I am. My personality is a bit vicious. I'm also a touch stubborn. I'm also a piece of trash who won't even lend an ear to what anyone else is saying. Whether it's in the past or now, that's all still the same," Eugene said with a grin as he ruffled Mare's hair. "Between honor and Akasha? If I had to choose one, then of course Akasha is more valuable. But that said, while honor isn't completely worthless, I don't really enjoy commenting about whether or not someone is honorable. Especially when it comes to myself. But then why do you need to accept the duel?" Mare pleaded. "Because I'm not going to let him take it from me," Eugene promised as the corners of his mouth twisted into a smile. "I can only use spells up to the 6th circle, but that's only spells. Isn't that right? Without relying on magic, there's a lot of other things that I can do. If I immediately summon the Wind Spirit King, you can't really classify his existence according to the circle formula, now can you? Of course not. Spirits are spirits and circles are circles, so how do you decide what the equivalent is?" Mare hummed hesitantly. "Apart from that, I've also got other things up my sleeves. If I thought I was going to lose, then I wouldn't have accepted the duel under these conditions, Eugene assured her. Eugene understood why Melkith had been trying to warn him. While Eugene was talented, Generic Osman was also quite the talented person. If it was a contest of their magic, then Eugene wouldn't be able to beat Generic even if he got a free revive. Honestly speaking, even if Generic was only limited to spells of the 5th circle instead of the 6th circle, Eugene wasn't confident that he would be able to beat Generic in a battle of magic. However, this wasn't a battle of magic. It was a duel. Moreover, Generic had even told Eugene that he was free to use all of his abilities. The Lionheart clan's main family had recognized Eugene's martial talent and adopted him, but he was still only 20 years old. Experience was something that came with age, especially when it came to combat. So how exactly did Generic see Eugene? In the 3 years that Eugene had spent in Arath, he had kept himself confined to Akron. The news that Eugene had killed both assassins and sand shamans in Nahama hadn't been revealed. Generic was also ignorant of how Eugene had fought with Barong in Samar, and the Zoran tribe had helped him while Eugene was escaping the forest with the elves, making it seem like Eugene hadn't done anything. Generic knew nothing about Eugene. There was no way for him to know that Eugene was really the reincarnation of the stupid Hamel, who had been a companion of the Great Vermouth 300 years ago. Right now, magic wasn't the core of Eugene's abilities. He had always been a warrior since his previous life, and that was still the case now. Magic was just one of his various different means. So even if Generic was the superior wizard, setting the limit at the 6th circle was both ignorant and arrogant on his part. There's going to be a duel, Generic declared as soon as he descended from his carriage, his voice trembling with excitement. He quickly gave orders to the wizards from the Green Tower of Magic who were waiting there to meet him. A duel isn't any fun without a lot of spectators. Go and deliver the news of this duel to the tourists in Meridian Square. Tell them that the square behind the Green Tower of Magic will be open so that they can watch. Generic had designated the site of the duel to be the square behind the Green Tower of Magic. The land there was the private property of the Green Tower of Magic. It was also close to one of Aratha's famous tourist attractions, Meridian Square. As long as enough of a crowd is gathered, it will be difficult for the other tower masters to oppose the duel, Generic schemed. The news of a duel, especially one between the famous Eugene Lionheart and the Green Tower Master Generic Osman, would spread quickly. Spectators would surely flock to the duel while feeling as if they had just won the lottery. Under such circumstances, if someone tried to cancel the duel, the audience was sure to be outraged and might even take Generic's side without Generic even needing to come out and say something. Eugene arrived moments later as his aerial carriage landed on the ground. There were already spectators packed tightly around the outskirts of this large square. Nasty bastard, Melkith grumbled as she glared out the carriage window. She had expected something like this from the moment that Generic had designated the square behind the Green Tower of Magic as the site of their duel. That was why she had told Eugene to quickly give up, but it's still not too late. So what if it's embarrassing? Melkith scolded silently. Something like public outrage could easily be suppressed by showing the civilians something even more scary and revealing their true strength. Of course, such an oppressive method was sure to lead to dissatisfaction later, but Melkith wasn't the type of person to care about something like that. Really now, quite a lot of people have already arrived after only a few minutes, Eugene commented. Are you feeling nervous? Generic asked with a smile. While it looked polite on the surface, having seen what truly laid below, it just felt disgusting to Eugene. Eugene chuckled and shook his head before saying, not at all, since I'm the type of person who gets more excited the more people are watching me. As he'd thought, Eugene really was just a cheeky brat. Generic kept up the smile on his lips, even as his eyes filled with a cold chill. About that familiar, Generic brought up as he glared down at Mare, who was standing next to Eugene. Generic clearly remembered how Mare had thrown a dirty napkin at his chest. It was so ridiculously insulting that Generic had gotten flustered and failed to stop the thrown napkin from hitting him. The words that had followed were equally absurd. On his knees with his head bowed very respectfully, apologizing to something like a mere familiar, Generic continued speaking, do you intend to use it as a meat shield? I have to say that would be a pretty good strategy. Although I don't know about you, that familiar is quite durable. Even after breaking it apart again and again, you can still restore it by infusing it with some mana. Eugene squeezed out a dry laugh as he unfurled his cloak. You told me to use my full ability, right? Honestly speaking, it didn't feel good to hear that. And I'm not using Mare, I'm getting help from her. Help? Eric repeated doubtfully. Well anyways, since Mare's existence is also part of my full range of abilities, I will make sure to get her help, just as Sir Eric has advised, Eugene said politely. Eric just thought of this as a futile display of stubbornness. Could this be an example of the pride that came from being young and hot-blooded? Eric snorted and pulled out a long staff from inside his robe. Whatever you like, Eric offered generously. Eric didn't know what kind of help Mare could give to Eugene. Even if he had known, he wouldn't have placed any restrictions on using Mare. While claiming himself to be the wise Sienna's legitimate successor, Eric also took great pride in the fact that he was an archwizard of the 8th Circle. Let's get started, Eric proposed. Would it look better if he took the time to play with his opponent? Or would it be better to finish Eugene off quickly so that he wouldn't even get a chance to put up any resistance? Either way, the result of this duel would surely end up being Eric's victory. This was quite the happy problem for Eric to be facing. A young child like this who coveted things that were out of his league and was overconfident in his talents needed to be properly disciplined. Let's start by showing him the difference in our levels, Eric thought with a relaxed smile as he raised his staff. He had decided what kind of spell he would start off with from the moment that he had set the limit of all magic spells to the 6th circle. The Divine Tree. A huge amount of mana was directed by the staff into the earth, causing the ground to shake. The surging soil wrapped around Eric's legs. Meanwhile, a white mane flowed up in the air. Chapter 125, The Green Tower Master, 2. Divine Tree was cast without any incantation. It only took a few seconds for the soil of the square to gather to Eric and transform into roots tightly wrapped around his legs. An archwizard's casting speed was very fast. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that as long as it was a spell from a circle below their own, an archwizard could cast any spell near instantly. But casting speed wasn't the only thing that was fast in this duel. While Eric was casting his Divine Tree, Eugene immediately began operating the Ring Flame formula. A match of speed? That was something that Eugene also held confidence in. His talent for mana control that he had shown even in his previous life had also been enough for Sienna to click her tongue in amazement. Both hands were inside of his cloak. His left hand was holding Akasha while his right hand held several daggers. When the Ring Flame formula was operated at its highest setting, a brilliant white mane of mana formed around him. Mare, Eugene called out her name in his head. Mare, who was crouching in the depths of his cloak, responded to the unspoken voice. There was no need for her to stick her head out of the cloak. Mare was able to share Eugene's vision from inside the cloak. This was because Mare's control formula was transferred to Eugene himself rather than Akasha. Sienna had hoped that the familiar she had personally created and cherished would be of help to Eugene. In place of herself, who had yet to be released from her seal, Eugene silently chanted the name of the spell. Chain Leap. The spatial coordinates that he hadn't yet grasped for the spell were instead calculated by Mare. While the roots of the Divine Tree were lifting Eric into the air, Mare had already finished calculating the spatial coordinates. Once calculated, these coordinates were immediately transferred into Eugene's head. As Eugene's right hand was pulled out of his cloak, the daggers that he was holding disappeared. At the same time, Eugene's body also disappeared. Crack. Daggers that were suddenly thrust at him from all different directions collided with Eric's mana shield. Paying no attention to this, Eric continued relaying his instructions to the Divine Tree. Roots speared out of the earth and concentrated on a certain location in the air. Such cheap tricks only show his mediocrity, Eric sneered to himself. It seemed like Eugene was trying to open up some space between them by first teleporting those daggers, then teleporting himself away while Eric was distracted. Eric snorted in derision and examined the ends of the roots. But there was nothing there. What? Eric had clearly predicted that Eugene would blink to that location. Had his senses mistaken him? Oh, it couldn't be. While blinking, he actually cast a dispel on himself and then blinked once more? Eric realized in shock. Such a fake-out shouldn't be accomplishable at Eugene's level. In the first place, a teleportation spell like blink was just as risky as it was convenient. Casting a dispel right after blinking, then picking some other coordinates to jump to wouldn't be an easy task for even the most battle-hardened wizard. As such, Generic told himself that he had to have made a mistake. Meanwhile, Eugene just thought, "You were the one who told me to use everything that I have." It was true that he had dispelled Blink right after casting it. As for the resulting mana backlash, that didn't matter. If there was a backlash, then all he needed to do was redirect it. Archwizard Generic hadn't spotted this because not even a speck of the dispelled mana had escaped Eugene's control. Eugene's mane of mana flared outward. Blue mana light was mixed into the pure white flame. He had appeared elsewhere on the wide-open square, the noise of his arrival being masked by the sound of the crowd, only the vibrations of his mana revealing his position. In his right hand Eugene held a... The vision it granted allowed Eugene to understand just how high-level a spell like the Divine Tree was and realize that Generic kept a dense field of mana around him under his own control. "It's impossible to approach him stealthily," Eugene judged. "The moment I approach, I'll make contact with his mana. From there, it would depend on the difference between their reaction speeds." Even if Generic noticed his approach, Eugene just needed to be faster than any attempts to keep him out of reach. Boom. He kicked off the ground with a forceful burst. Shortly after that, the roots wrapped around Generic's body sprang into action. It looked as if all the land surrounding Generic was now trying to attack Eugene. "I've made contact," Eugene immediately realized upon seeing this reaction. Even if the difference in reaction speed was only as thin as a piece of paper, it still worked out in Eugene's favor. Before the roots could take a swing at him, a jagged sword with an edge like a saw blade thrust out of his widely spread cloak. It was the devouring sword Asphal, a sword that could cut through spells. While rotating his body like a spinning top, Eugene swung Asphal. The roots wrapping around Generic were sliced apart. Generic's eyes widened in alarm. They shouldn't have been cut so easily. These roots were made of earth bound together with mana. Their earthen structure should have been hard enough to be a match for upper-level barrier magic. The mana, no, the spell formula itself was sliced apart, Generic realized. However, the attack was too shallow. The roots had been sliced into, but the cuts weren't deep. The strands of the spell formula that had been cut apart just needed to be woven back together and the damage would be restored. Pursing his lips, Generic began chanting an incantation. There was a limit to the level of the spells that he could use, but Generic didn't care about that. In the first place, he hadn't felt any sense of crisis from the prior situation, he had just felt slightly surprised. Too shallow. Eugene had also sensed the same thing. As he'd suspected, was Eugene really being too unreasonable to immediately try and comprehend a spell's structure and cut at its core on his first time seeing it? Without feeling any disappointment, Eugene pulled out Akasha. "Mare," he silently called. Without any distraction on his part, the spell that Eugene wanted to use was cast with perfect timing. Whoosh. Eugene's body was yanked backwards. The roots that had just been flying towards him narrowly brushed past him as Eugene was pulled out of reach. "Sir Eugene," Mare called out in warning. "I know," came Eugene's short reply. The attacks didn't just stop at just the roots. As Melkith had warned him, flying into the sky just because the earth was under Generic's control was a blind path to defeat. When battling against wizards who flew freely through the sky, the type of spells that were designed to bind their feet or send them plunging back down to the ground were innumerable. The dense field of mana that was under Generic's control transformed into a heavy weight that pressed down on Eugene's body. Then the ground shook as if responding to the weight. Crack. Roots surged up from below, forming a jaw full of sharp teeth that tried to swallow Eugene. Would Eugene be able to escape this using his strength? "Do I even need to?" Eugene scoffed. Without having mastered any magical speciality, Eugene should have been left with no choice but to escape by using force. But he soon proved that there wasn't any need for that. Akasha's dragon heart shone with a red light. Mare accelerated the formation of a spell and Akasha amplified the spell's strength. "Blast," Eugene chanted silently as his eyes were fixed above his head. His spell blasted away the mana that was weighing down on him with an explosion of air. "Frostfield," Eugene uttered his next spell. An ice magic spell of the sixth circle, one that Eugene had learned from the Hall of Freezing Chill, slowed the movement of the roots. This was only the start of the spell. The rapidly spreading frost stopped the movement of the roots in their entirety. Then the flames of the ring flame formula engulfed Eugene completely. This was an ability that had nothing to do with magic. He was just covering his body in sword force. This was a conversion of a warrior's defense technique known as the aura shield into a more offensive version of itself, the Hamel style. Sir Eugene, what exactly is the poltergeist aegis? Mare asked. Shut it, Eugene snapped as his face twisted into a scowl. Bang! His foot slammed down and shattered the frozen earth. However, the shattered roots were immediately reconnected and Generic was now looking at Eugene with a frown. All of the spells that Eugene had used just now were from the sixth circle. Even though they were above Eugene's apparent level, the flow between the different spells was unbelievably smooth. The sword that sliced my spell must be the devouring sword Asphal. And that must be the Lionheart clan's white flame formula. Fine then, it's no fun if the ending is too one-sided, Generic thought as he expanded his field of awareness. By doing so he was finally able to cast his magic in earnest. The reconnected roots all began attacking Eugene as one. There was also movement from the ground below the roots. Each individual grain of soil became sticky and tried to cling to the soles of Eugene's feet. Flames surged forth. The burst of fire pushed Eugene off the ground. Eugene quickly checked above him, only to see countless bullets of mana were now aimed at him. They weren't just simple bullets either. Even without touching them, Eugene was able to tell what they were. The way that the bullets were aiming at him from every direction, they formed a prison meant to constrict his movements and force him back to the ground. Blink, Eugene ordered. I can't. The space has been locked down, Mare reported. Then can't you just open it back up? Eugene asked. Mare couldn't understand what Eugene meant by these words. How was she supposed to open up a space that had been locked down by an archwizard? But she soon got it. At the same time, Mare realized that she might have been underestimating Eugene quite a lot. Isn't that too barbaric? Mare shouted. So what? Eugene shrugged internally. Hick. Eugene tore his foot completely off the ground, ripping the sole free from the grains of soil clinging to it. His ring flame formula reinforced his mana, turning the flame blue. Bonk. His foot slammed into the ground as he cast the fifth circle spell Earthquake. Well, it was normally a fifth circle spell, but considering the power it was cast with and the effect it showed, Eugene's version was clearly beyond that. Generic's cheeks trembled from the amount of mana and the precision with which he pushed that mana into maintaining his spell. Thanks to this, the land under his control wasn't damaged any further by the spell. However, the earthquake's shockwave disturbed the mana locking down space for a moment. Ordinary wizards wouldn't have even been able to feel this vibration, let alone seize the opening, but Eugene was different. He quickly inserted the formula for the blink spell into the opening that he had created. And with that he teleported. Generic reacted too slowly to pick out the coordinates for his sudden blink. Icicles. A hurricane of cold air formed into a bundle of long icicles that all fired at once. The attack appeared from Generic's blind spot. Generic clicked his tongue and drew on his magic. Thud. The icicles slammed into a raised shield of roots. Eugene, who had come flying in together with the icicles, twisted his body. His 2 feet slammed into the end of an icicle, plunging it even further into the root. Soon frost began to form all over the roots. What is he doing? Generic couldn't understand what Eugene's moves were meant to achieve. The flow between his spells is smooth. The power behind his spells is also impressive. However, they still won't be able to reach me. Wouldn't it be more effective for Eugene to try and swing Asphal like he had before, or make use of his physical skills? Generic realized something. For him to stubbornly stick to using magic, this cheeky brat. Could it be, since he was dueling with a wizard, Eugene had decided to persist in solely using magic? Generic's eyes grew bloodshot with rage. Crack. The frost that had spread over the roots was shaken off. Gore. The whole square shook as all the soil under Generic's control transformed into roots that rose up like a nest of snakes. At the same time, all kinds of spells began taking form in midair. They were all attack spells that wouldn't exceed the limit of the sixth circle. So even as he manifested all these spells at the same time, there was still a lot of spare capacity left in Generic's mana control, allowing him to maintain control of the spell he had already cast. The nest of snakes. No, roots began to dance, a wild dance where they seemed to be flailing at random. While mixing flight, jumps, and sprints into his movements, Eugene wove his way through the roots. He wasn't just dodging them. With each step that he took, Eugene left a burning footprint behind. Blaze Stamp. Generic knew this spell as well. It was a 6th circle fire spell that was stored in the Hall of Scorching Heat. Engraving a seed of flame into the ground with each step, it was a spell that was meant to set a wide area on fire when all these stamps resonated together at once. The power of the Blaze Stamp varied depending on how many footprints the caster had left. What a one-dimensional plan, Generic sneered. Because his opponent was large, he had decided to use Blaze Stamp. This was an idea that anyone could have come up with. And since he was dealing with roots, he should just use fire? He couldn't really be that stupid, could he? The divine tree might be a tree, but it wasn't really a tree. In other words, this meant it wouldn't burn as easily as a dry branch would. He really is as fast as a rat. Just how long will he be able to keep jumping around? Do you really have the mistaken belief that I can't catch you? Generic thought as he held back a grin. The spells that Generic had prepared in the air prevented Eugene from leaping above a certain height. The thrashing roots seemed to be attacking randomly, but they were actually directing his movements into certain specific directions. Whichever way Eugene decided to approach, Generic was fine with it. The moment that Eugene had gotten deep enough, Generic would capture him without giving him a chance to escape. Should I just smash him to pieces instead? That might be more convenient, Generic thought idly. Generic was confident that he could kill Eugene instantly. However, that was something that should be avoided. Even Generic was aware that he couldn't afford to go that far. Or else should I wait until he gets deep enough and tries to open up a path with Asphalt? But does he really think that I'll get hit by something that I've already seen once before? Battle was, in the end, a challenge of wits. Knowing how many cards that they each held in their hands and being able to see a few steps ahead of your opponent were the most important factors in a battle. Generic was well aware of how vital these were. He believed that he had gotten Eugene's full measure, and that he was looking far enough ahead of his young opponent. He hasn't summoned a spirit yet, Generic noticed. It was well known that Eugene Lionheart was carrying WMWD. Seeing as how he even carried Asphalt as well, he probably even had a few others of the Lionheart clan's treasures on him. Generic assessed the situation. But anything else is probably too wild and unwieldy for him. He won't be able to use them as he pleases. If he tries to force their use during a narrow opening, he'll just get interrupted by my attacks. Something like this didn't apply to Generic. His body was placed in the center of a solid tree trunk. The greatest advantage of Yggdrasil was its defensive power that didn't even require the use of any defensive spells. With all that said, he wasn't just a huge stationary target either. Even at this moment, Generic was still able to transfer to another root and have it serve as the new tree trunk. It's a pity that I can't allow any flowers to bloom, Generic regretted. If the limit had been set at the 7th circle, it would have been even more fun to play with you. While Generic was feeling such regret, Eugene had entered the trap. With a grin, Generic set the divine tree into motion. The ground that had completely transformed into a nest of roots gathered up into a huge wave that washed over Eugene. Also, the spells that had been prepared in midair were launched, bombarding Eugene's location. Mayor, Eugene called. Even at this moment, Eugene wasn't even slightly flustered. Yes, Mayor replied, knowing what he wanted her to do. She withdrew to the depths of the cloak on her own volition and began calculating spatial coordinates. The cloak of darkness billowed wide. The nearest root was swallowed by the cloak and then projected in the opposite direction. The roots collided with each other, twisting around and forming a tangled mess. This left various spells still pouring down at Eugene from overhead. At the center of this knot of roots, Eugene looked up at them. They didn't just have numbers. In terms of variety, there were dozens of different types. Since he couldn't use Blink, should he try and cut them with Asphalt? Or else should he just break through with the Poltergeist Aegis? Neither option really attracted him. Eugene bared his teeth in a grin as he focused. Ching. The sudden strain gave him a dizzying headache. It felt as if his brain was on fire. Inside of the cloak, Mare let out a shocked scream. You want to do that now? Although she shouted this, Mare still focused her concentration. Their concentrated focus resonated with each other. Mare felt some responsibility for this duel. If she hadn't needlessly confronted Generic, then she wouldn't have been insulted as a mere familiar. If not for that, Eugene also wouldn't have bothered to take part in this duel. But Mare also felt some grievance towards Generic. To this Green Tower Master who didn't really respect Lady Sienna, she wanted to break. No, to snap off his long nose. So in the place of the absent Lady Sienna, she wanted to be of help to Eugene. By doing so, she wanted to guarantee Eugene a victory. All the mana amplified by the ring flame formula was drained away. Blood began to drip from Eugene's bloodshot eyes. Even as he cried tears of blood, Eugene processed the formulas of each spell bombarding him and grasped each of their complex spatial coordinates. On Akron's 6th floor in the Hall of Space, there was a certain pinnacle 7th circle spatial magic spell. Reverse rotation. The space around Eugene was cut off. Then the space around the falling spells, or at least all that were within the range of Eugene's vision, was also isolated. The two disconnected spaces were then linked and swapped with each other. Boom. The roots of the divine tree, which were still entangled, were bombarded by the spells that appeared between them. Generic couldn't comprehend what kind of spell Eugene had just cast. No, he refused to comprehend it, even though he had definitely heard the incantation. Reverse rotation, even amongst the other 7th circle spells, was known to be of especially high difficulty. So, how? There was no way Eugene should have been able to use it. No, he might have heard something like this from Tremple Vizardo. That Eugene had been able to use the 7th circle's scorching flame ball. But that's a completely different kind of magic. Generous shouted his protest in complete disbelief. Caught in a chain eruption of spells, the roots collapsed. Generic gritted his teeth as he reasserted control over his spell. Still shedding tears of blood, Eugene now stood in the sky. He had wanted to capture all the spells that could be seen within the space swapped by the reverse rotation, but it seemed that he had hit his limit. Looking around at the spells that had awkwardly frozen in midair as Generic was distracted, Eugene pulled out Asphalt. Generic was a bit too late in noticing this. Such an unbelievable surprise could delay even an archwizard's judgment. As he hastily reclaimed control of the spells and ordered them to attack Eugene, Eugene just kept his arm loose as he swung Asphalt. The slash of the sword seemed to be almost boneless, but even so it was unbelievably sharp and fast. The preempted spells were all shattered, and the scattered mana was devoured by Asphalt. The flame wrapped around Eugene's body grew even stronger. Eugene knew better than anyone that a battle ultimately came down to a challenge of wits. Opponents who were confident in their own strength were actually easier to deal with. Their certainty in their inevitable victory due to their own pride and arrogance could be used in all sorts of ways to place a noose around their necks depending on the situation. As for Asphalt, Eugene had shown it off once. Then he didn't use it after that. By doing so, he had made it seem like Eugene was limited in its use. Generic had said that he would only use spells up to the 6th circle. However, Eugene had no such restriction placed on him. Even so far he had only used spells up to the 6th circle as well. He had also placed more emphasis on his magic than he did on his physical skills. Generic had taken this as Eugene being arrogant. He had only seen the surface, just as Eugene had been hoping he would. In the end, Generic had drawn up a plan that had seen him drawing Eugene into a trap by allowing him to run freely, then defeating him using their overwhelming gap in skill. Eugene had drawn up a different plan. The burning footprints still remained on the surface of the roots that he had woven his way through. Eugene willed these footprints to burst into flame. A dizzying red line was drawn through the air and began radiating heat. Shortly afterwards, it exploded into flames. Boom boom boom. The explosion from the blaze stamp further magnified the explosion caused by the chain of spells that had erupted deep within the tangle of roots. The crowd surrounding the square let out screams of excitement as the heat wave washed over them. Taking a deep breath, Eugene held Akasha out in front of him. Hesitantly, Mare asked, "Isn't this too brutal?" "It's fine," Eugene replied with a smirk. As he cast Scorching Flame Ball, a small ember sparked to life in front of Akasha's jewel. Eugene lightly pushed the ember forward. The heat and the flames that had erupted from the blaze stamp was drawn to the Scorching Flame Ball. The slowly flying Scorching Flame Ball crazily grew in size. "He's that crazy bastard," Melkith cried out, her face having already turned white as she blankly watched the duel take place. Quickly leaping into the air, Melkith's hair rose to point at the sky. The ground where the spectators were standing shook. The Spirit King of the Earth had descended at Melkith's call. The Spirit King of Earth received a command from Melkith's will and began to move. Crack-a-crash. A huge wall of earth rose up in front of the crowd. Will it be enough? Melkith anxiously asked herself. Melkith wasn't the only one moving to protect the crowd. It was unknown when exactly they had arrived, but the Blue Tower Master Hiridus Usland and the Black Tower Master Balzac Ludbeth also flew up into the sky. The two exchanged a glance, then applied their own barrier spells to the earthen rampart that Melkith had created. Generic groaned, "Ugh." The flow of mana was intense. Generic glared at the approaching scorching flame ball as it continued to grow in size. Was a dispel possible? It was too late. Now that the spell had grown so large, there wasn't any use in trying to collapse it. He was left with no choice but to try and push it backwards. Generic's lips moved quickly. While ordering any roots still able to move upwards, he also attempted to cast a spell. "Tempest," Eugene called out as his left hand emerged from his cloak. Generic's face paled as he saw the beautiful silver-blue sword that Eugene was holding in his hand and heard the name that Eugene uttered. "Come here and push that," Eugene boldly commanded. The wind began to churn crazily as the Spirit King of the Wind descended onto this plane. As if to show off his dignified stature to everyone, Tempest appeared standing next to Eugene. Eugene narrowed his eyes as the hot air washed against his cheek and grumbled. "Stop acting cool and push already." Ahem, Tempest coughed in embarrassment and stretched one hand out to the scorching flame ball. A raging wind emerged from his fingers and made contact with the ball of flames. The moment he saw this, Generic realized that it would be impossible to continue resisting by relying on the divine tree. An explosion of flames soared high into the air. Chapter 126, The Green Tower Master 3. "Why are you blocking the view? Show us what's happening." These roars were coming from the crowd. Normally, Melkith would have unleashed a tirade on them for their ingratitude towards their saviors. But currently Melkith couldn't care less about the squabbling of the crowd. It wasn't just Melkith either. All three of the Tower Masters who had stepped forward to protect the spectators had their eyes fixed on the pillar of fire soaring high up into the sky. The flames slowly dissipated and the raging heat began to fade away. Although the air was supposed to still have the chill of early spring, the crowd started taking off their coats as they felt as if they were in midsummer. Eugene stared straight forward, through the shifting and wavering haze as he caught his breath. He could see some huge things wriggling within. Eugene smirked and waved his hand. Responding to this, tempest winds blew and swept up all the remaining heat in an upward blast. This allowed Eugene to confirm what he was seeing. The wriggling objects were giant roots. Though not as large as those of the world tree that he had observed in the Elven territory, these roots belonged to a tree that was still large enough to remind him of it. If one had to pick out the largest difference between the two trees, it was that the end of each branch and root of this tree had something that looked like a flower bud. But, in any case, this tree had quite the bizarre appearance. The center of the tree trunk split open. Generic, who walked out from within the tree, was biting hard on his lower lip as if he wanted to draw blood. Even though he had just been struck by the combination of the scorching flame ball and Tempest's tornado-like winds, not a single scorch mark had been left on Generic's body. Eugene was honestly amazed. So this was Yggdrasil, the signature spell of the Green Tower Master, Generic Osman. The moment that the firestorm exploded, the sixth circle divine tree had instantly transformed into Yggdrasil. The resulting explosion was then blocked by an instant casting of a continuous defense spell and layers of roots. Eugene began speaking without first sending Tempest back to his realm. As he stared at Generic, who was still in the center of Tempest's tornado, Eugene continued, "No matter how you look at it, that's not a sixth circle spell." Generic kept silent. "It seems that you've violated the restrictions that you yourself brought up." "Oh yes, you aren't really going to try and make any arguments about the fact that I used 7 circle spells and summoned the Spirit King first, are you?" Eugene taunted. Still without making any reply, Generic just glared at Eugene. Although his chewed-up bottom lip covered up the bitter taste of defeat, Generic's spirit raged as the taste of blood filled his mouth. How could he be humiliated like this? Generic had ended up violating the restriction that he himself had set. At that moment, it would have been difficult to defend against the explosion with his divine tree or other 6 circle spells. Even though it was just a single scorching flame ball with Tempest Tornado added on top of that, the attack had become absolutely impossible to block with anything within the 6th circle. As such, Generic had been left with no choice but to use Yggdrasil. If he didn't use it, although he probably wouldn't have died, he would have still suffered equal disgrace. No. Instead, this might be even more disgraceful. Jen-Eric lamented. Eugene met Jen-Eric's simmering gaze. Humiliation, rage, and hostility were all mixed into this gaze, blending into a dark, murderous intent. No, there's no way. He's not unhinged enough to go crazy in a place like this, is he? Eugene asked himself. Just judging by his gaze, it seemed like Jen-Eric really might come running at him to try and kill him, but Eugene wasn't too worried about that. After all, weren't there a lot of spectators? And weren't the blue, white, and black tower masters all waiting nearby? Eugene smirked and looked up at the sky. Boom. A huge door fell from the sky and stayed upright as it landed on the ground. The door was engraved with many intricate carvings. Seeing this, Jen-Eric's face contorted. It seems that it's already over, Lovelian said as he descended shortly afterwards and sat on top of the door. As his eyes blazed red with anger between his shaggy blonde bangs of hair, Lovelian asked challengingly, "Or perhaps you intend to continue?" "Red Tower Master," Jen-Eric eventually spat out, after he had buried all his murderous thoughts back deep within his heart and twisted the corners of his wooden lips into a stiff smile. "Your disciple, he's really impressive," Lovelian agreed smugly. "I'm sure it's not just you, everyone else here is also thinking the same thing." Eugene looked at the door Lovelian was sitting on with sparkling eyes. It might be his first time seeing it in person, but seeing a spell with such depth that he couldn't understand even with Akasha and the intricacies of its formula alerted him as to what this door was. It was Pantheon, the signature spell of the Red Tower Master, Lovelian. The reason why Lovelian had summoned it from the moment that he began descending onto the scene was that Jen-Eric still had Yggdrasil cast on the field. And not only that, he had also sensed a subtle murderous intent coming from Jen-Eric's gaze. "Green Tower Master," Lovelian called out as he placed his gloved hands on the door frame. "Your gaze feels a bit overbearing. Is my disciple bothering you somehow?" "How could that be?" Jen-Eric reluctantly denied. "I'm just feeling amazed by this junior's overflowing talent." Lovelian silently stared at Jen-Eric. Tap tap tap. In this silence, the sound of Lovelian tapping the door frame echoed through the air. While wiping the back of his hand across his lower lip, which was now bleeding, Jen-Eric took a few steps back. "He truly is impressive," Jen-Eric repeated with a sigh. Yggdrasil scattered into dust. Even the churned-up ground calmly subsided. "I could never have imagined that he'd be so exceptional. I heard that he managed to cast the 7th circle scorching flame ball, but to think that he would truly be able to cast reverse rotation as well. And even summoning the Spirit King of the Wind on top of that." Jen-Eric deliberately raised his voice as he said this with a chuckle. Jen-Eric didn't want to expose his wounded self-esteem by acting petulant. Even though if he could have his way he would much rather soothe his ill temper with a few choice words. While Jen-Eric was doing this, Eugene unfurled his cloak of darkness and said, "It was all thanks to Mare." Although the cloak had already been opened up for her, Mare failed to emerge on cue. Both the reverse rotation and the scorching flame ball were spells that Eugene shouldn't have been able to handle yet, but he had managed to cast them thanks to her help, and even if Mare wanted to hide she couldn't avoid receiving the praise for this. Now really," Eugene said with a sigh as he reached into his cloak, grabbing Mare's hood from where she had been lying down deep inside. As she was dragged out like this, Mare just lied there limply, her eyes spinning in circles. Mare groaned feebly. You work. Great work," Eugene complimented her. We're done, right? It's okay for me to rest now, right?" Mare pleaded. "It's not like you even need any sleep anyway," Eugene scoffed. "Even so, I still need rest. Ever since I was first created, this is the first time that I've ever felt so burned out," Mare whined as she tried to wriggle her way back into the cloak. However, Eugene didn't let go of Mare and held on to her hood tightly. "Just wait for a little bit more," he told her. Mare childishly drew out the question. "There's something that you still need to hear," Eugene pointed out. Jen-Eric's shoulders shook at these words. Mare's eyes, which had been drooping sleepily, started to sparkle as life returned to them. Throwing back her raised hood, Mare stared at Jen-Eric. That's right," Mare slowly drew out the words as a wide smile spread across her face. "Sir Eugene, you really did win. You defeated the Green Tower Master, Jen-Eric Osman, in a duel. It's all thanks to your help," Eugene generously conceded. Humph. Oh no, not at all, even without me I'm sure you would have been able to win just fine. For maybe not. Yes, that's right. If I hadn't been there to help, there's no way Sir Eugene would have been able to win. Isn't that right? I'm telling the truth, aren't I? Mare turned to look up at Eugene and smiled pridefully as she asked these questions. You might be strong even without my help, but because I helped you, you became even stronger. Thanks to that, do you know how difficult it was for me? Seriously, it felt like I was going to overheat from the burden of calculating all those formulas. That sounds quite exaggerated, Eugene pointed out. Alright, fine, it was an exaggeration. No matter how much my processors are burdened, I won't burn out just from calculating formulas. Because my core structures were created by none other than Lady Sienna after all, Mare proudly declared. Eugene nodded in agreement and patted Mare on the head. When he had first started patting her, Mare had warned him that he shouldn't cross the line with her, but at some point she had stopped rejecting Eugene's touch. Could you really have forgotten the bet? Eugene eventually asked, looking at Generic who was standing there woodenly. Generic's lips were twitching silently as if lost for words, and his face contorted terribly as he heard Eugene's question. Had he forgotten the bet? No, of course he remembered it. If he was defeated, then he would have to get on his knees, bow his head and apologize to Mare very sincerely. Could it be that you're embarrassed by having so many spectators? Eugene teased. The high earthen ramparts had already been lowered. While they hadn't been able to see the decisive moment, the crowd could easily tell who the winner was between Eugene and Generic by one's dismayed gaze and lowered head. Generic felt like everything that had happened was part of a conspiracy to drive him crazy. Eugene snorted a laugh as he passed by Lovelian and approached Generic. Once he was standing in front of Generic, Eugene's feet lightly tapped on the ground. A newly created earthen rampart now surrounded Eugene and Generic. If it's like this, no one will be able to see us. Since I'm making such a concession, it should be fine now, right? Eugene pressed Generic. Grr. After staring blankly at his new surroundings, Generic clenched his fists and squeezed out a smile as he growled. You want me to thank you? Do you really want to push me this far? Is even this not enough? Eugene's smile fell from his face. Green Tower Master. I've won our duel. You, the Green Tower Master, are the one who placed that restriction on yourself. You're also the one who decided not to place any restrictions on me. Could it be that you really thought there was no way you could lose? Generic's silence was as good as a confession. If that's the case, then it seems that the Green Tower Master has really underestimated me, Eugene said with a frown. So much so that it's even insulting. I am a Lionheart as well as the Red Tower Master, Lovelian Sophie's disciple. And I've even been recognized as the successor to the wise Sienna. With better regret, Generic protested. If it wasn't for the restriction. Eugene snorted and said, Isn't that obvious? I'm aware of that as well. If the Green Tower Master had just set the limit at the 7th circle instead of the 6th circle, I wouldn't have been able to win as easily as I have now. What? Generic barked, his eyes narrowing as he glared at Eugene. Easily? You're saying that you won easily? Against me? If not, does it look like it was a difficult victory for me? Green Tower Master, from the start of our duel to the end, all your movements were made according to my will, Eugene revealed. Generic was unable to muster up a rebuttal. Eugene gave some advice. You should just admit the truth, Green Tower Master. You overestimated your own strength. If you had gone into the duel without placing any restrictions on yourself, would I have been able to win? If that was the case, then I might as well become the Green Tower Master, no? Generic was unable to say anything to this. Everything that Eugene had said was the truth, and trying to argue against it would only lead to Generic making even more of a fool of himself. I'll bend. He couldn't take back his words. Nor could he do anything about the fact that he had become drunk on his own arrogance and overconfidence in his own abilities, thus leading him to be falsely certain of his own victory. My knees. He had looked down on his opponent and ignored what cards Eugene could be keeping hidden. Generic had been so sure of his lead in the fight and had been so certain that he was the one in control of his opponent. And apologize. So what honor was there in arguing against that now? No, esteemed creation of the wise Sienna. I called you a mere familiar, looked down on your existence, and my father even dissected you for the purposes of experimentation, Generic confessed. Honestly speaking, he really didn't want to say these words. He also didn't want to bow his head, and he definitely didn't want to bend his knees. As for this apology, he really wanted to ask why he was being forced to do something like this. However, Generic still had to do it. No matter what excuses he might come up with, he couldn't change the outcome of the duel. After all, wasn't being beaten by a boy much younger than himself already shameful enough? Instead of arguing against it, it was better to admit defeat and use the restriction as an excuse to alleviate some of the shame from this duel. If there hadn't been any restrictions, then of course he would have won. In order to protect his remaining honor, Generic just needed to accept the results and keep to the words he had said in haste. I apologize for all of those, Generic concluded his apology. Got it, Mare replied with a smile. She walked out of Eugene's cloak fully and stood in front of the kneeling Generic. I, Mare Meridian, have received the Green Tower Master's apology, Mare formally declared, puffing out her chest, placing her hands on her hips and glaring down at Generic. From here she had a very good look at the top of Generic's deeply bowed head. Seeing this, she couldn't help but feel refreshed inside. Mare snorted proudly a few more times before turning and going back to Eugene. Sir Eugene, we did it. Mare cheered. Eugene nodded and agreed. That's right, we did it. Eugene opened his cloak slightly, but Mare didn't duck inside. Instead, she came closer and hung onto one of Eugene's arms with a giggle. It might be because her body had been relieved of all its tension, but she found it difficult to walk and was dragging her feet. In the end, Eugene picked Mare up and sat her on his shoulder. Mare let out a startled sound, but immediately corrected her posture to sit securely on Eugene's shoulder. This is more uncomfortable than staying inside the cloak, Mare commented. Of course it would be uncomfortable, Eugene acknowledged. It seems that I'll need to prepare a cushion for times like these. Or else, Sir Eugene, this cloak can change its appearance, right? This prickly fur, can't you swap it for a fluffy cushion instead? Mare requested. Eugene admitted, I can change it, but I don't want to. Why should I? What kind of madman goes around wearing a cushion on the shoulder of his cloak? Can't you even do that much when I'm so tired? Mare pouted. Yep, I really can't. If it's uncomfortable and you can't stand it, just go back inside of the cloak, Eugene told her. You're the one who put me up here, Sir Eugene. Because that was easier than carrying you around in my arms. Eugene persisted in refusing to transform his cloak's appearance, leading Mare to pout her lips in disappointment. The earthen rampart that had been recently raised was lowered. At the same time, Generic stood up and neatly brushed the dust off of his knees. However, he couldn't completely hide his twisted expression. After glaring at Eugene, who was standing with his back to Generic, the latter cast blink and left the square as soon as the barrier disappeared. Why did you hide it? Malkith fussed as she approached. After all, I also wanted to see that bastard, the Green Tower Master, get down on his knees and cry like a baby. He did get down on his knees, but he didn't cry, Eugene informed her. That's why there's a problem with your method. It's said that an apology is only complete when there are tears as well. If I had been there with you, I'd have made both tears and snot run down the face of the Green Tower Master, that shameless old man, Malkith said as she let out deep sighs of sincere regret. Lovelian was watching Eugene from the side. It was the first time Eugene had seen Lovelian with such an expression on his face, and the eyes with which he was looking at Eugene were also different from normal. The Pathian that Lovelian had summoned had yet to disappear and was still standing tall behind Lovelian's back. That's... Eugene tried to smile brightly as he tilted his head to the side and asked, Did I make you mad? Yes, Lovelian answered without any hesitation. I am mad. Just what in the world did you think you were doing? Eugene, do you know where I went today and why I went there? Eugene hesitated. Oh yes. You've just been to Abram, right? That's right. I've just returned from Abram. Eugene, I hate going to Abram. I truly detest it. Unless they're a member of the court wizards, no wizard would enjoy going to Abram. 1. Because going there leaves a wizard feeling powerless, Lovelian admitted as he waved his hand with a deep sigh. At this gesture, the door of Pantheon that had been standing there imposingly vanished into mist. Lovelian explained, with the hearing over and done with, Aratha's royal family has acknowledged that Akasha is under your ownership, Eugene. However, the king of Arath wasn't present at the hearing, so someone needed to report to him in detail and guarantee both your worth and your continued good relations with Arath. That was why Lovelian had been called. He was the master of the Red Tower, an institution of Aroth, and an arch-wizard who had held a position of authority in Aroth for dozens of years. The conversation with His Majesty was quite enjoyable. His Majesty also accepted the situation. However, having such a long conversation in Abram left me feeling very uncomfortable. Even so, for the sake of my disciple, I did my best to endure it. Lovelian guilt Eugene. Eugene stammered. I'm sore. Don't apologize, Lovelian said without allowing Eugene to finish what he was saying. But you said that you were angry? Eugene meekly pointed out. I am angry. I am angry at you, Eugene, because you were reckless enough to accept such a duel. Since the Green Tower Master was the one to challenge you to duel, he wouldn't have been able to refuse even if you asked to postpone it. You should have made sure to discuss with me first about whether the conditions of the duel work fair before you agreed to a duel with the Green Tower Master. Lovelian chastised. Hey now, Red Tower Master, Malkuth cut in. I was there as well. I think that the conditions were pretty fair. Lovelian demanded. Please be quiet, White Tower Master. You aren't Eugene's master. Her intervention proving useless, Malkuth grumbled and shook her head. So you're saying that you're angry because I acted on my own? Eugene confirmed. It's because you weren't being careful enough, Lovelian corrected. Eugene argued, however I won. That's why I said that you don't need to apologize. Even if you were too reckless in getting into such a duel, Eugene, you won your duel with generic Osman, Archwizard and Green Tower Master, Lovelian said proudly, his mood no longer angry. You were amazing. It's all thanks to me, Mayor, who was still sitting on Eugene's shoulder, haughtily cut in. Yes, Lovelian agreed. Lady Mare was also truly impressive. That's if I hadn't made sure to block it off properly, most of the crowd would have been burned to death. Malkuth, who had been listening silently, thrust herself back into the conversation. Lovelian turned to look at Malkuth with a hesitant expression before saying, How amazing. Ahem. I was just doing what I should, Malkuth replied with some embarrassment and tried to avoid his gaze. Chapter 127 The Green Tower Master 4. That night an unexpected guest arrived at the Red Tower of Magic. Because if I had sent word of my intention to visit, I'm sure that you would have declined it, confessed the Black Tower Master Balzac Ludbeth. Taking off his black fedora, Balzac smiled at his unwelcoming hosts. Eugene and Lovelian weren't returning the smile. The corners of Lovelian's lips were downturned and Eugene had an even more blatant expression of dissatisfaction on his face. Although their reaction to his presence was rather harsh, Balzac was used to such treatment. Would it be all right if I come in? Or else would you like to come out for a walk with me? Balzac politely asked. Lovelian reluctantly responded to his question. You're not here to find me, are you? Please don't feel too disappointed, Balzac chuckled. If the Red Tower Master is fine with me, I'll be happy to come and accompany you at any time. Even though Balzac said these words with a smile, Lovelian's expression stiffened drastically. Just like Eugene, Lovelian also didn't have much tolerance for black wizards. Even if he didn't consider all black wizards and demon folk to be absolutely evil, Lovelian definitely didn't believe that he could ever become friends with them. Is there any way for us to refuse you? Eugene asked. If you reject me today, I'll just come back tomorrow, Balzac threatened. But I intend to return to the main estate tomorrow. In that case, it seems that we only have time for this today. By any chance, are you free right now? If not, dawn also works for me. This meant that Balzac was determined to take up some of his time no matter what. Eugene coughed and glanced at Lovelian. Since it's getting dark, if you absolutely need to have a conversation, then let's head inside, Lovelian conceded. The Red Tower of Magic was Lovelian's territory. As long as they stayed inside the tower, it was possible for him to be able to intervene no matter what type of situation might occur. It was unlikely that the Black Tower Master would do anything too absurd, but Lovelian just couldn't trust this mysterious black wizard. Please come in. Eugene also felt reluctant to invite Balzac in. However, he was also curious about what kind of matter could make a black wizard like Balzac come visit in person. Especially since Balzac was a black wizard personally contracted to the Demon King of Incarceration. Perhaps he was here to bring a message from the Demon King of Incarceration himself? In all my years, to think that there would come a day when I would be able to enter the Red Tower of Magic, Balzac marveled, appearing to be in a good mood. As he looked around Eugene's spacious quarters, he continued speaking. As Sir Eugene may already be aware, the Red Tower Master doesn't like me all that much. Eugene defended his master. But he has reason not to, doesn't he? Balzac nodded. Yes, that's why I don't feel upset by it. The Red Tower Master's hatred is a hatred directed at all black wizards. That's a burden that all who are black wizards must share. Eugene was also aware of the reason why Lovelian hated black wizards. Lovelian had lost his family to a black wizard's human experiments. He had seen his own mother, father, and younger sister being turned into a writhing chimera right in front of his very eyes. If it wasn't for the wizard who had shown up to hunt down the black wizard in his own dungeon, Lovelian would have been turned into another chimera as well. Eugene asked him, "Don't you find that the very existence of black wizards itself is considered wrong?" "Many people commit sins," Balzac answered as he sat down in a chair. "But no matter how many people there are who commit sins, it cannot be said that the existence of humanity as a whole is wrong. Are you really trying to say that while there exist black wizards who commit sins, there are also good black wizards as well?" Eugene said these words with disgust. "But in my eyes, the black wizard's very existence is a sin." Balzac just laughed. I didn't mean to start such a debate by saying that." No matter how you looked at it, Eugene's words were rude. However, Balzac did not express any displeasure over this. Instead, his eyes shone as if he was having fun while he stared at Eugene. "The goal that we are pursuing is different, is what I'd like to say. But as Sir Eugene may already know, it isn't just black wizards who conduct human experiments. Countless wizards throughout history have committed terrible crimes and broken all sorts of taboos in order to try and gain esoteric enlightenment through those attempts," Balzac argued. "However, they never signed a contract with the Demon King," Eugene pointed out. Balzac suddenly expressed a startling opinion. "In the present age, demon kings aren't much different from gods." Eugene instinctively felt offended by these words. Balzac continued. "Well, this is clearly blasphemous, so I won't be able to defend myself even if I do get rebuked for this. But, in my opinion, the demon kings are actually better than the gods." "How so?" Eugene demanded. Balzac began his argument. "All gods have to start by proving their existence. However, we already know the demon kings exist. Not in the vague heavens, but on this very land, they can easily be found in Helmuth." Although it was offensive, Eugene couldn't deny such words. Of course the gods can bestow miracles, but, rather than their unreliable miracles, isn't it much better to have a demon king who reigns over you personally and can be seen at any time? Also, demon kings are reasonable. Rather than things like belief and faith, a contract made using the soul as collateral is more reliable and worthwhile, Balzac argued. meownovel.com is updating your favorite novel. Worthwhile, Eugene skeptically repeated. To put it simply, black wizards are just pragmatists who seek extreme efficiency, Balzac summed up. As Sir Eugene may know, magic is a harsh, capricious, and unreasonable discipline. No matter how hard you try or how much you yearn for it, if you don't have the talent, then you can't become a wizard. At these words, Eugene recalled Euid. For such people, contracts with demon folk are bound to feel very attractive. By selling their soul, they can get the magic that they so desire. The only cost is one that they themselves must pay. It doesn't bring any harm to others, Balzac insisted. It's only when they can't be satisfied with that they might commit sins. What about the black wizards who do commit a lot of sins? Are you trying to say that it's also because they're pragmatists? Eugene challenged sarcastically. If there is a clear profit to be made by violating human morality, then it is possible that they might cross that line in order to pursue the truth. But that's true of most wizards though, Balzac countered. As Balzac had once said a long time ago, people like wizards can easily sacrifice something like morals for the sake of satisfying their own curiosity and desire. Or, to put it in simple terms, there are many times more aberrant wizards than there are aberrant black wizards. Changing the subject, Eugene asked, did Sir Balzac also sign a contract with the Demon King for practical benefits? Balzac hummed thoughtfully, a thin smile appearing on his lips as he tilted his head consideringly. Have you heard a lot about me? I've heard that you were once fellow students with the Blue Tower Master, Eugene revealed. It's not like we were under the same master, but yes, I too was once a member of the Blue Tower of Magic, Balzac confirmed. According to the Blue Tower Master, when you were still a member of the Blue Tower of Magic, Your skills were said to be quite impressive, Eugene mentioned. While it might look like I'm gilding my own face, yes, that is the truth. When I was still in the Blue Tower of Magic, I performed much better than the current Blue Tower Master. Then here it is. If I had just spent a few more years there, I would have become the Blue Tower Master instead of here it is. Balzac fell silent for a few moments, tapping on the armrest of his chair before continuing. However, it's just that rather than settle for what was going to fall in my hands naturally, what I wanted was more than that. More than that? Eugene repeated curiously. I am not the wise Sienna. Balzac suddenly brought up her name from out of nowhere. Eugene frowned, not understanding what he meant by that. Balzac chuckled and continued speaking. The wise Sienna is loved by magic. Lady Sienna was a wizard who could even pose a threat to a demon king, but ever since Lady Sienna's birth, no other such wizard has ever appeared. That goes for me as well. Of course, I don't mean that I wish I could pose a threat to the demon kings. It's just that I desire to become a wizard as great as she is. Eugene listened silently. It's not just me either. Amelia Merwin and Edmund Codrith too. The three of us could have become arch-wizards, even without having signed a contract with the Demon King of Incarceration. It's just that we wanted more. Any wizard who believes himself to be a genius will hold a desire to see the very end of all magic. However, such an end is far out of the reach of even an arch-wizard, Balzac said regretfully. You can read this novel at meownovel.com for better experience. An end, you say? Eugene smirked and shook his head. So what, are you saying that after you signed a contract with the Demon King Black Tower Master, you were able to see the end? Balzac nodded and said, I have a feeling that I'm getting closer to the end little by little. I also hope that through this conversation, Sir Eugene has come to understand me even a little more. Is there a reason why you need me to understand you? Eugene asked with a raised eyebrow. It's a little, no, very distressing to be treated like a villain even though I haven't done anything, Balzac claimed sorrowfully. Was he joking? Eugene couldn't tell what Balzac's true intentions were, so he just kept up a stiff expression. Balzac shrugged with a sheepish smile. Aren't I at least better than Amelia Merwin, though? Balzac eventually asked. Eugene said as he finally nodded his head with a grin. I was wondering why you had come looking for me. So you've heard something about me from Amelia Merwin, haven't you? It looks like you made valuable use of the letter that I gave you, Balzac observed. Though I didn't expect that it would really be used so quickly. Honestly, I didn't really want to use it, Eugene readily admitted. I've heard that it was an accidental encounter. It came as quite the surprise to me as well. To think that she would really go and create another dungeon, and that she would actually run into Sir Eugene there. Balzac marveled at the coincidence. Are you aware of the full story? Eugene checked. I haven't been able to hear it. Although I was curious, Amelia Merwin refused to tell me about it, Balzac complained. Eugene said once more. So the reason why you came looking for me today was that you wanted to ask about the full story? Would you be willing to tell me? Balzac asked hopefully. Nope, Eugene answered without any hesitation. If it really makes you that curious, instead of asking me, can't the Black Tower Master just ask the Demon King of Incarceration, whom you serve so happily? I might be able to do that, but the Demon King of Incarceration probably won't answer me. Because I'm not the only one who is receiving the Demon King of Incarceration's favor, Balzac said reluctantly, pursing his lips as if he was disappointed by this. I wanted to hear the whole story from Sir Eugene, but since you have no intention of telling me, I won't be stubborn and insist on asking about it. If that's the case, will you be heading back now? Eugene asked hopefully. There's still a matter that needs to be addressed. What kind of matter? The Rakshasa Princess. Balzac's voice lowered as he said this name. Also known as Iris. Have you heard of her? I've been told that she is the head of Helmuth's Dark Elves, Eugene replied. News that Sir Eugene brought more than 100 elves out of Samar with him is sure to have reached the Rakshasa Princess as well. So before too long, the Rakshasa Princess may make her way to the Lionheart clan for some negotiations, Balzac reported. Eugene's brows furrowed as he repeated Balzac's words. Negotiations. Yes, Balzac confirmed. It's because she's obsessed with increasing her fighting power. While you were in Samar, did you happen to see any dark elves? There were rumors about them and I've heard a few stories from the elves, Eugene replied evasively. If that's the case, then this should be easy for you to understand. The Rakshasa princess's influence in Helmuth isn't all that great. The pure-blooded demon folk consider the Rakshasa princess and her dark elves to be hybrids, and the Rakshasa princess is currently competing with the other high-ranking demon folk to become the next demon king, Balzac exposited. Do you think she has a shot at it? Eugene asked. Of course not, Balzac replied without any hesitation. The dark elves are a special subspecies. It is impossible for even the demon king of incarceration to corrupt a race and create a new one from it. The only ones with that special power were the demon king of fury, who died 300 years ago, and his adopted daughter, the Rakshasa princess, who now commands the dark elves. The demon king of fury had been slain. This left Iris as the only one in this world who could turn an elf into a dark elf. As I said during the hearing, the demon king of incarceration provides a lot of charity to those elves who immigrate to Helmuth after being afflicted with the demonic disease. They receive a complete exemption from the life force tax, and even without selling their souls, they receive a generous pension every month. For the sake of the dark elves, he has ordered that a forest that is already far too large for their reduced numbers be set aside as the territory of the Rakshasa princess. Balzac said with a slight smile and shake of his head. Of course, most of the pension that each elf receives is taken away to be used as the Rakshasa princess's military funds. But the problem is that the Rakshasa princess's goal is far too large, and with her independent army so weak, it is impossible for her to achieve it. As far as I am aware, the number of dark elves led by the Rakshasa princess numbers less than 1,000. It couldn't be helped that this number was much smaller than it had been 300 years ago. At that time, more than half of the dark elves led by Iris had been killed by Sienna during their subjugation of the demon king of fury. On top of that, most elves preferred dying from the demonic disease rather than becoming a dark elf. In other words, Sir Eugene is harboring a 10% increase to the Rakshasa princess's manpower in the Lionheart clan's main estate. Blinded as she is by her desire to increase her war potential, it is inevitable that the Rakshasa princess will turn her eyes to you, warned Balzac. If she comes looking for me, I'll just tell her to fuck off, Eugene replied with a cold smile. Or perhaps, are you asking me to try and negotiate with the Rakshasa princess? Balzac hurriedly denied this. What right do I have to persuade Sir Eugene of that? Not to mention, I am not even one of her allies anyway. Then just what is it that you want to say to me? Eugene demanded exasperatedly. Balzac began to explain, I've told you something like this before. While the demon king of incarceration controls Helmuth, he does not control the entirety of the demon folk. The queen of the night demons, Norgiabella, and the black dragon, Duke Raizakia, have not signed contracts with the demon king of incarceration, and apart from them, countless other demon folk are also outside the demon king of incarceration's control. Eugene silently glared at Balzac. He still had no idea what in the world Balzac was trying to warn him about. Of course, such demon folk are still subject to sanctions when they break the laws set by the demon king of incarceration, so they're forced to take responsibility in exchange for the freedoms they've enjoyed. Just like how Baron Ulfar was decapitated for trying to seduce Sir Ewyd. Balak brought up an example known to Eugene. In the end, the demon king was just the most powerful one amongst the demon folk. Just like how the king of an ordinary kingdom couldn't know every single move that his people make, the demon king was similarly helpless. A demon king would only be able to seize control of a demon folk's soul if they had made a contract with him. However, all that said, the strength of the demon king was absolute in Helmuth. If the demon king of incarceration were to order someone's death, any demon folk weaker than him would have to offer up their heads, even if they hadn't signed a contract with the demon king. Even in Helmuth, there are some demon folk that the demon king of incarceration cannot fully control, Balzac pointed out. Are you talking about those who follow the demon king of destruction? Eugene asked, picking up the hint. Yes, especially the beast folk among them, Balzac responded, confirming Eugene's suspicions. Eugene tried to keep any emotions that he was feeling from being expressed on his face. Balzac had to be talking about Oberon's son, the sworn brother of Barong, the beastman Eugene had fought with in Samar. The Rakshasa princess has only recently realized the reality of her situation. With less than 1,000 dark elves, it is impossible for her to become a demon king if she stubbornly insists on solely relying on her own people's support, Balzac revealed. So you're saying that she's joined hands with the beast folk? Eugene guessed. But as far as I know, the current chief of the beast folk, Jagan, killed his own father to take the position. And that father of his happens to have been the Rakshasa princess's brother. Balzac shook his head and said, no, the Rakshasa princess hasn't joined hands with Jagan. Instead, she's recruited some of the beast folk who follow Jagan to be her mercenaries. Mercenaries? Eugene tilted his head and silently muttered this word to himself. Jagan is a tyrannical beast who reigns solely through his own strength. He despises those who are weak and doesn't even place them in his eyes. In order to catch Jagan's eyes, the ambitious beast folk have no choice but to develop enough strength. Balzac continued his lecture. Eugene silently took in this information. Because of this, there are many beast folk pursuing active careers as mercenaries in Helmuth. By fighting in the territorial battles between the small and medium-sized aristocrats, they are able to gain combat experience and raise their own strength by preying on other demon folk. And they do all this because they won't be able to win Jagan's favor if they're not strong enough. Balzac finished presenting his observations of the beast folk. Barung had said that the reason why he was searching for the elven territory had nothing to do with Jagan. Could that guy have been serving as a mercenary for some demon folk and have gone there after receiving an order from them? Eugene speculated. Eugene couldn't openly ask any questions about Barung. For now, he had no choice but to wait and see what kind of information Lovelian might be able to pick up. Visit. For the best no experience. Master Lovelian should be listening in on this conversation as well, Eugene thought with some reassurance. Lovelian should also have pricked up his ears at this talk about mercenaries, and he could use that as a starting point to gather information about Barung. Without any trace of hesitation, Eugene nodded in understanding and said, that guy named Jagan, he seems to have quite the crazy personality. Balzac pointed out, he's someone who tore out his own father's throat after all. Even the Rakshasa princess wouldn't be so quick to join hands with such a renegade. And as Sir Eugene has already said, the father who Jagan ended with his own hands was also the Rakshasa princess's brother. The beast folk tribes, when led by Oberon, had served the demon king of fury alongside the Rakshasa princess. Although the beast folk were now sworn to the service of the demon king of destruction, the Rakshasa princess would definitely be reluctant to join hands with Jagan, who had killed her former comrade and brother, Oberon. If Sir Eugene refuses to negotiate, then the Rakshasa princess is sure to back down. Because she's not so desperate that she would attack the Lionheart clan's main estate in order to take those elves for herself. However, there is a possibility that she might send beastfolk to attack. Balzac stood up as he gave one final warning. Jagan shouldn't have any reason to show up in person, but you shouldn't take any member of the beastfolk lightly. What are your reasons for providing us with such a warning? Eugene asked suspiciously. Balzac hesitantly admitted, one reason is that I want you to owe me a favor. Sir Eugene, but please don't take this the wrong way. I don't want to use this favor for any, sexual purposes. No matter how much he pretended that it hadn't affected him, it seemed that what happened last time when Eugene had asked him if he was gay, had left a thorn embedded deep within Balzac's heart. The other reason I give this warning is for my own personal reputation. I'm already so hated just for being a black wizard, but should the beastfolk from Helmuth really attack the Lionheart clan without any warning? Should a tragedy occur as a result of that, I'm afraid of any blame that might come my way for not having said anything, Balzac confessed. Don't you think that you're attracting so much hatred because you're needlessly staying in Arath? If you were to leave for Helmuth, then I'm sure there would be far less hostility, Eugene kindly advised. While that might be the case, I'm not very fond of Helmuth, Balzac claimed with a smile as he lowered his fedora back onto his head. Christina rubbed her stiff cheeks. The appearance reflected in the mirror was somehow unfamiliar to Christina, especially her expressions. Christina furrowed her brows, straightened them and then blinked intently. The flesh beneath her fingertips felt soft, but she could feel her facial muscles stiffening at the slightest pressure. Originally, this had been the natural state of affairs. Back then it hadn't felt strange at all. This sort of expression was just how Christina used to look. Christina chewed on her lips a few times, then smiled self-consciously. It's only been a few months, she thought to herself. Christina tried changing her smile a few more times. However, no matter what she did, it didn't feel right to her. Had she smiled like this when she was in Samar? There had to have been more than a few times when she smiled like this. For Christina, smiling all the time was just a habit. even if she didn't have a reason to smile. That was just what she was taught to do ever since she was a child back in the monastery. Rather than an expressionless or upset face, a smiling face would make her seem more friendly. It's only been a few months, but I can't recall what my usual expression was like, Christina silently sighed. Christina raised the corners of her lips with both index fingers. But was a forced smile like this really any better than a facade? As her fingers fell, the raised corners of her lips also drooped once more. Christina sighed. Family, huh? Parts of the conversation that she had had with Eugene before leaving the Lionheart estate refused to leave her head. My own birth father is just saying these words to me because he's worried about me, his only son. MeowNovel.com is updating your favorite novel. Since I know that it's all for my sake as his son, I should at least pretend to listen to my father. These weren't particularly important snippets of conversation, but even so, they had been lingering inside her head for the past few days. Christina also knew that there was nothing inherently special about such words. However, what really mattered was that such words were only commonly found among real families. That was why Christina wasn't really able to understand the sentiment behind such words. Ever since she was born, Christina had never once been part of a true family. But that's why it matters to me even more, Christina admitted to herself. She heard a knocking on the door. Christina pasted the still awkward-feeling facade back onto her face. In her own mind, Christina absently addressed Eugene. I know that you didn't have a good reason to do so. Her facade might feel awkward right now, but she would soon get used to it. But I would have been fine with you killing me, because while meeting her father, Cardinal Rogerus, Christina would need to be able to keep up such a smile without focusing on it. That way, I would have been able to leave this place and never come back. Christina had hoped to never return to this place.